I've seen a couple things on LinkedIn and vendor websites for people selling software into this industry. I've started to see FedRAMP logos on people's websites.
Yeah, it's uh it's really interesting to see FedRAMP logos popping up on different software companies' websites just in time for CMMC compliance to be coming into full effect. What, April here?
Imminently.
It uh it surprised me a little bit. Like, so where would you go if you wanted to see if a company was actually FedRAMP approved? And what does it take to even get in the marketplace?
So if you're if you're selling software to the defense industrial base and they're going to use your software to store or process CUI, okay, so you're in scope for CMMC, like paperless parts, you need to be FedRAMP moderate equivalent, right? So at a minimum, things that would need to happen is that software vendor would have to go implement all the FedRAMP requirements. There's 325 controls. It's like 4 times the number of requirements as CMMC. And you have to go pay a third-party FedRAMP assessor to come assess your system and write this huge report.
What does something like that cost?
I mean, just the assessment is a 6-figure engagement for sure.
To do it the right
And
way, right? And how
sorry,
many assessors are out there? Like, what would you? Yep.
there's probably like a dozen legitimate assessors out there. Um, so if someone puts FedRAMP on their website, at a minimum, I would expect you to be able to call them up and say, "Who's your assessor? Let me see the system security plan. Let me see your Sawyer, your security assessment report." And there should be hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of documentation, right, showing everything they did to implement FedRAMP and showing from a third party, that it's actually been assessed, and here's the report we wrote. So if they don't have that, like, you can nitpick the definition of what equivalence means, right? And get into lots of details there. But if they haven't implemented FedRAMP and gotten a third-party assessment, they're not even close to FedRAMP moderate equivalent. And that journey takes years. So if you think somehow a software vendor is going to go from, I just heard the word FedRAMP to FedRAMP moderate equivalent in like less than 2 years, impossible.
Talk to me about these guys that are like their way around it is like, you download it on your environment. Does that automatically mean my software is now FedRAMP compliant if it's a installed software? What's that like?
That is one path you can take. So if you have software that is normally available in the cloud and you need to be CMMC compliant, sometimes you can basically run that on-prem. You can get an installable version of that software and put it on your own server. But here's one thing to look out for. If the vendor has like access into your network through that software, so if they can like log into your network and see your data, that's going to be a problem unless they meet a whole other bunch of requirements. They would have to be an MSP, they'd have
Yeah.
to go meet all these other CMMC requirements if they have access to your system.
Feels kind of like a wave coming. A lot of people saying, "Hey, we can do this, we can do this," and then all of a sudden, it's going to turn into a house of cards.
At this stage, it is very easy to say it's going to be okay. We're going to be compliant, right? And where it's going to hit the fan is as soon as these folks start going through their third-party CMMC assessments, it's going to come out real quick. They're going to say, "Let's look at your system diagram. Where's all the CUI going?" They're going to point to, "Oh, this is a cloud service. Prove to me their FedRAMP moderate equivalent." And you're going to go ask for the documentation from the vendor, and it's going to be crickets. And you're going to be in a really bad situation because you're either going to fail your assessment or you're going to have to remove that system from your environment, that cloud provider from your environment real fast.
So let's talk about for a second pulling that cloud provider out of your environment. Now, let's say I'm a shop and I've uploaded CUI to that cloud provider that we've now just learned actually didn't do what they told us they were going to do. And oh, and by the way, probably their terms and conditions say you can't sue us for anything ever because we're limiting our liability no matter what you do. It's like, what do you have to do? Like, what's even, do you need to now report this to your customers that you've put their CUI in an environment that is not like, talk to me about the cleanup here. It seems like a massive, just
Well,
mess.
what you're going to do since you're pursuing CMMC is you're going to follow your incident response plan because that's an incident. That information spillage is an incident. So
Is
now
that
you realize that
or is it potentially thousands of incidents if you've loaded it all? Like is it each
should we call it DOD and ask?
Well, I mean, it feels like you might have to.
Yeah, it feels like you might have to. So it's certainly an incident. It's maybe a lot of incidents. You're going to have to run your IR plan. You're going to have to consider it spillage, right? Because you've taken CUI and put it in an unauthorized system. And you're going to have to deal with it. You're going to have to respond to that incident. So, and the other thing is if it's a material incident impacting government data, CUI, you have to report that to the DOD. I think it's within 72 hours.
Yep.
So you're going to file a report, and I don't know what happens after that. You probably hear from them, and they're going to have a whole lot of questions for you.
Yeah, like what are you doing? And putting the country at risk.
What are you doing with our data?
Yeah, it's super interesting. It makes me nervous. That's why I wanted to talk to you about this because I feel like a lot of people are really quick to jump on the bandwagon when they need to, without actually doing it the right way. I was looking at our finances over the last few years. We spent almost $5 million on CMMC compliance, and people are like, how do you do that? And you start to list off where the money's going. One, it's development. You have to develop the software the right way.
Yep.
And we're an all US person's team.
That's right.
Imagine what that would have cost if we had a team overseas and we had to break them out from the development.
If you had non-US persons, software engineers working on your product, it is a pretty big project to have them able to contribute code to your product, but have absolutely no access to the production systems, that they can't get access to customer data. And it makes them way less effective as software engineers because they can't actually go look at customer accounts and understand how people are using the software, right? Everything becomes secondhand. You have to communicate really effectively with them. So, I mean, that's why we have not gone that route. It's just hard to be effective in that environment.
We're also spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on monitoring and logging and tracking to make sure that we understand what's happening in the application all the time, because it's our responsibility. Like
that's one of the hardest parts of FedRAMP moderate, is how much you're never done with it. It's not like you go implement these controls and you walk away. It's a ton of the requirements are around continuous monitoring. So we have to be constantly running very expensive software, right? And have people looking at what it tells us to make sure that we're on top of whatever's going on in our environment.
So is there a question that our customers should ask, or that a machine shop out there should ask a vendor about that? Is it like, what do you use for continuous monitoring? Like, how would you frame up that question just to see if they pass the bullshit test?
There's a bunch of things. There's a bunch of things your CMMC assessor is going to ask for, right? For you to be able to pass this assessment, which means you should be asking your vendors for those. And those things would be their system security plan. Can you see it? Could be over screen share. That's fine. They don't have to email it to you.
What if they just email it to you? Is that like legit? Like what?
Well, what's interesting about that is FedRAMP requires that the system security plan, it's not CUI, but it needs to be handled like CUI, basically, is kind of the short version of how that needs to be controlled. So that would actually be a red flag if a FedRAMP vendor just emailed you their system security plan.
It's good to know. That's good to know.
But you need to see it. You need to review it for sure. You also need a customer responsibility matrix, which is an Excel spreadsheet showing you how to implement that software successfully in a CMMC environment. So if they don't have that, and it doesn't make sense to you, that's a problem. And you need to see evidence that they got that third-party FedRAMP assessment. So that would be, for example, a system assessment report.
Managing all this seems like a full-time job inside of Paperless Parts.
Oh,
so
we have many people working. We have a team of people supporting our FedRAMP compliance.
So if I'm a company and I've got maybe 30, 40 people on staff, and none of those people have cybersecurity governance, have backgrounds in CMMC compliance, have the title of CISO, whatever it is it reasonable to expect that they're actually doing things the right way?
We've been looking at this basically since we started the company 8+ years ago. And this is not something we could have undertaken until we reached like pretty substantial size. So, we're a little bit more than 100 people now. A very small company could not credibly achieve FedRAMP moderate compliance.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And the government's made it hard. Like I fully acknowledge that. But at the same time, the risk is real.
They're not hacking. The foreign adversaries aren't breaking into defense contractor, the primes and the Pentagon. Like they're getting it from the smaller shops in the supply chain. So that's why these requirements are coming. And if that means that certain shops or certain cloud vendors can no longer support this industry if they're not willing to make the investment or can't make the investment, I think where the DoD's at on this is so be it. Like it doesn't make sense to spend billions and billions of dollars developing this military technology if the IP, the intellectual property, is just going to get stolen by the adversary. Like, what's the point?
This kind of reminds me of the good, fast, and cheap triangle, right? Like you can get two of the three. I see vendors out there saying they can provide FedRAMP compliant software for hundreds of dollars a month or less. And I'm just always amazed by that because I'm like, where are you making your money? And I think that's the thing that I try to encourage people. Like I think about social media, right? Social media is free. Why is it free? Because you are the product.
You're the product.
You're the product that's being sold. So when you're loading your data into a system that is really cheap and it's supposed to be really secure, you kind of have to wonder, like, what's the product? What's going on? And what happens when they take a shortcut and you lose all your data?
Our customers understand supply chain, if you're in relationships really matter. And, you wouldn't let, at least for long term, you would not let some vendor lose money on you because you need these vendors to be in business. Like a finishing shop, like you rely on them, and your metal provider, you rely on them, and vice versa. The machine shops and the job shops are the same way. Like they need to be profitable or they cease to exist. There's cloud providers that are not going to survive this transition.
And what's interesting is we're hearing more and more that people get hacked with malware and ransomware. And so now it makes that on-premise solution even more risky. So like, acknowledge, great. You download the software, you have it in your environment, great. You can be CMMC compliant. But the very first time someone on your team clicks a link that's ransomware, that piece of software, along with all of your other databases, will now be encrypted. And what that's going to feel like is probably like being in prison because you're completely handcuffed in what you can do. I mean, we're talking to a shop right now that's going through this problem.
Absolutely.
And it's an absolutely helpless feeling.
The shared drive's gone. No G code, no CAD models,
nothing.
Can't even get into their ERP.
And even if you pay the ransom, what are the chances that they've taken all that data?
Well, I mean, it's definitely out there. Like the data is out there, you have to assume.
So now you go down the path, right? You have a responsibility to report it to the government, right? Mm-hmm. Been hacked, had all this data. Now you have to call all of your customers. That's the right thing to do. You have to let them know you've been hacked. All the data has been compromised. What do you think that's going to do to the business?
And what the DoD looks at, whether you finish CMMC and gotten assessed or not, you've been signing contracts, right? Representing that you've implemented 800, 171, the NIST standards. Yeah. So if they really want to get you, they're going to come after you with false claim suits. I mean, they can bury you.
Yeah. And so I think, just to put a period on this, I've been seeing a lot of people make a lot of claims, and God, honestly, I hope they're true, because if they're not true, it's going to put a lot of people at risk. I think my goal of having a conversation with you about it, just recording it so we can share it with people, is what's the saying? Buyer beware.
And show me.
Yes.
Show me. If you're FedRAMP, show me. There should be so much documentation, and there's a third party involved. Like, show me that you're FedRAMP.
Prove it, right? The burden of proof, have to prove it. So I hope this is helpful for anybody who listens to it. If you have questions, you can email Paperless Parts. Send me an email, Jason@paperlessparts.com. Shoot Scott an email, Scott@paperlessparts.com.
Yeah, we've been through this. We know how it works.
We do not want American intellectual property leaving this country. Read too many articles where we're finding out that some core piece of tech was found in another system that's being used against us. Can't have that. Cannot have it. This is your responsibility. It's our responsibility as a partner to our customers. So anybody you work with, if they don't take that responsibility seriously, they're not the right partner for you.
Totally agree.